Pro TV. I'm your host, Don.
Coming at you live from San Francisco, California.
You're watching IT Pro TV.
Hello, and thank you for watching IT Pro TV, helping you level up with IT learning everywhere you go. I'm your host, Zach Memis, for this episode of CompTIA Linux Plus. And this episode is Introduction to Linux. And I can think of no other person to tell us about that than Don Pizzette, and he's right here. Don, good to have you.
Hey,
Thank
glad to be here, Zach. And in this episode, we're going to talk about the Linux operating system, which is really what this whole series is about. But if you're new to it, it's actually very different than a lot of other operating systems that are out there. So we're going to take a look at a little bit of the history. Where did Linux come from? Who created it? What's the design methodology behind it? These are all different things that we really need to understand about the software to make effective use of it and to see kind of how everything lines up throughout the whole rest of the course. So that's what's going to be coming up right here in this episode.
Well, great, Don. And, first of all, I want to say you look like Sherbert with the background we have here. It looks wonderful. But tell us about the history of Linux. Who created it? How did it start?
Well, at a high level, it's a computer operating system, right? We can install it on our hardware and allows us as humans to interact with the hardware. And so that's what it does. But how it was created is actually a little bit different than a number of the other operating systems that we run. If you're familiar with Microsoft Windows and Apple's Mac OS or OS 10, depending on which version you're running, those operating systems were developed by commercial companies, generally to make money, right? That was kind of their goal. With Linux, it's a little bit different because it was created to be free from the very beginning. In other words, they didn't set out to make money on this. In fact, the actual origins of it are pretty interesting. It was created by a gentleman named Linus Torvalds, and he was a student in a college in Finland. And at the college, they used a number of computers there that were running an operating system called Minix. And Minix was based on another operating system called Unix. Now, Unix was developed by AT&T, and which is the American Telephone and Telegraph or whatever, the phone company here in the United States. And Unix was a commercial operating system. You had to pay for it. It had heavy licensing to it. So it wasn't something that just anybody could run. Minix was also a commercial operating system at the time, although it's free now. But back then it was a commercial operating system. And Linus was working on Minix machines at the university. And what he wanted was to be able to go home at the end of the day and use an operating system that was similar to what he was using at school. But he was a college student, didn't want to pay a ton of money, and just decided, you know what? I'm going to create my own. I'm going to create my own operating system that's very similar to Minix. And because Minix was very similar to Unix, most people describe the Linux operating system as Unix-like, that it's similar to Unix. And the name of Linux comes from simply